Hi folks, hope you had a good Christmas. Before we get into the topic at hand, an announcement. This is the official cover for my forthcoming book, iUniverse, designed by the publisher, Skylight Press. I was a little worried about what the cover was going to look like because I'm used to having control over that sort of thing due to the fact that I've self-published in the past. But I'm pleased to say that I like it. I like it quite a bit. I think it's better than the makeshift cover that I created a few years ago, which you may have seen on my website back when I was intending to self-publish before I got a book contract. So it's almost there, folks. Just the other day the publisher asked me to confirm my street address so that he could send the complimentary author copies. After that I'll be making an official announcement and you will be able to buy the book from various online sources throughout the world. Okay, so more news to come on that later. So anyway, in this video I got a question in early December from one of my patrons, Sal. Hi Sal, sorry I'm a bit late getting to this. So he asks this, I wanted to quiz you on your thoughts that some ponder made popular due to Elon Musk spouting this some months back about, do we exist as a computer simulation? I recently read Carlo Novellis' Reality is Not What It Seems and What is Time? And although he never states such a theory, it does appear that we live in a sort of pixelated reality where stuff we interact with, and indeed ourselves, is constructed from stuff that doesn't naturally square with what we would normally think. Okay. Also, recently you talked about the number pi and how it's a constant that is leaking into this reality from perhaps elsewhere. And obviously every time I think of constants, no doubt a bit like you, I start thinking about computer programs. I tried to find if you've covered this topic before in the past, but couldn't locate, so apologies if you've already discussed your thoughts on this topic, and feel free to link me to it. Obviously the thought of us all being some sort of Mandelbrot algorithm doesn't sit right with me, but then if I'm programmed to think that way, then obviously that's the correct state for me. All the best. Interesting. I think the question that really underlies this message is the matter of determinism. A computer program, a simulation, is essentially a lifeless thing that works on entirely deterministic rules that are made within the program itself. In other words, you can design a reality inside a computer program and it will do the things you want it to do because you're the one making the rules. So you can have NPCs, imaginary characters that the game player interacts with, and they appear to do things. They give an appearance of consciousness, but they're not really. They're very limited. But they can walk around and they can do stuff within the game arena. So it's interesting that we have the power to reconstruct a kind of limited subset of reality within a completely virtual space. How can we do that? Well, we can do that because we've identified the laws that hold our reality together. You see? So it kind of suggests that maybe the reality that we're living in, the universe itself and its laws, is in some sense a simulation. Now, maybe not a computer simulation, but by analogy, something similar to that. If we never had quantum theory, I think we could sell that idea a lot better, but quantum theory is the thing that really threw a spanner into the works because we had to come up with a whole new vocabulary to come up with to account for what was happening. So we have words like superposition and entanglement, and we know that a single particle can be in more than one place at the same time. Not that it's two particles, it's the one particle, but it can be in multiple locations. And the whole idea of superposition, the idea of something being non-localized in space, it's like it exists everywhere but nowhere, but it's still real. You know, the mind boggles, and I don't want to give an impression that I am well versed on quantum theory. I'm not. Let me see. I have a book on it that I thought was quite good on my shelf here somewhere. I'll maybe reach for it if I can find it. Yeah. The Quantum Universe, Everything That Can Happen Does Happen by Brian Cox and Jeff Forshaw. Read the whole thing, understood maybe a quarter of it, I don't know. It's tough going. So I trust the experts that we really do live in a quantum universe where the laws of Newtonian mechanics, while they are true within the limited context of their sphere of inquiry, they're not true universally. And quantum theory points to the idea that this is a sort of shimmering hologram that we live in. We can't account for everything just using the idea that three-dimensional space is fundamentally real and solid, because quantum theory has taken us beyond the idea of a discrete particle that's localized in space. So we have to have another view on it. We also know that we reconstruct a reality inside our heads. Inside our heads, that's not even the right expression, but we reconstruct a reality when we dream. And for the duration of the dream, unless you're lucid dreaming, we think it's real. We think it's the real world until we wake up and remember that it didn't really happen. But the real world that we're experiencing, we're also experiencing it subjectively, not objectively. There is an objective reality outside of consciousness, I think, but it doesn't necessarily, if you could just see the totality of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually a three-dimensional arena the way we perceive it to be. I think what we perceive is a very limited view on the universe. We don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes, but from our investigations into quantum physics, it goes pretty deep, right? So I don't think we're gonna, the whole thing about a computer simulation, you specifically used the view, a computer simulation. Here's the thing, computers are deterministic entirely. They can't do random stuff. Well, they can, but it's pseudo-random stuff. Logic gates inside computers are only meant to do specific things. I'm of the view, and I should talk about this at some point, but I'm of the view that there will never be strong AI. There will never be real consciousness within a computer. I will make a proper video on that at some point. I don't want to touch on it now because I think I would end up going off on that tangent for quite a number of minutes. But computers are deterministic. They allow us to create a fake reality inside virtual space. But is there more going on in the reality that we know, the reality that we experience, than there is inside the computer simulation of the reality? And the answer is yes. And the fly in the ointment is consciousness. Right? And you probably guessed I was going to come back to that. But you don't have consciousness inside a computer simulation, but you do have consciousness here. And it remains a fundamentally weird thing, a thing that is, I think it's impossible to explain in deterministic scientific terms because it's not a deterministic thing. It's actually the ground from which all spontaneity emerges. I'm experiencing a subjective reality here at the moment. It's like I'm pulling in something from the objective reality and representing it to consciousness subjectively, because I can't see ultraviolet, A bee can, but I can't. So I'm not seeing reality as reality is. I'm seeing a human interpretation of reality. So, I'm kind of getting my thoughts all tangled up on this here, but I really think the view that you're nothing but, the view that consciousness is really a kind of imitation, an imitation of consciousness is an imitation of consciousness. I'm not wording that very well, but you can't reduce consciousness to a deterministic set of rules because nobody's done it. It's like they call it the hard problem. Nobody knows why subjective experience is real, yet it is. And an important question is, where does it exist? Because we tend to think it exists in here. But if you say that and you have a materialistic, deterministic view of reality, you have to ask, where physically is consciousness? You can't just say vaguely in the brain. Where in the brain? Well, if you take a cursory glance around the brain, you're not going to find it. So let's delve into molecules then. Which molecule is consciousness in? Well, it's not in any of the molecules. There's the protons, neutrons, electrons. Where's consciousness there? It's not there. You know, we have a sense that your consciousness is physically located inside a brain. But that sense only comes because there are two eyes peering out on an interpretation of reality, reflecting back, seeing the appearance of a body, and having a sense that it is having a sense that consciousness itself is located here, but it isn't. It isn't located inside anything. You can't find it materialistically. So there's this whole big experience that we might call mind space that is quite real, and yet it is not located anywhere real. Real in the physical sense. That's mind-blowing, and I think a lot of people just ignore that. But to me that is really mind-blowing because I'm not ignoring it. People think experiences of a psychic nature are silly and to be laughed at. The idea that you can pick up a vibe from another person that you're close to. You know, you can have kind of interconnected feelings. Or the idea that consciousness can interact physically with your surroundings in a way that we would call psychokinetic. People laugh at that. But if your view of consciousness is a little more sophisticated than the common view that you're actually located inside a brain, it allows for these things, and these things can be demonstrated with a little effort, with a little dedication. And if you've been on my channel a long time and looked way back, you'll find videos where I investigate this thing myself, and I don't draw a lot of attention to it like I'm some kind of, you know, fame-hungry charlatan, but the investigation that I made is there for anybody who wants to draw something useful from it. Yeah. Okay, so, you know, the decision you have to make is whether you really think the universe is purely deterministic, including consciousness, whether the universe is purely deterministic in nature, and I don't think it is. I don't think consciousness can be explained deterministically. I think we're lulled into the idea that determinism is responsible for everything because science has a proven track record of success in explaining things deterministically. But I think we have to look very carefully at the question of consciousness, much more carefully than generally is done. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents. I do think this is a kind of simulation, but only by analogy. I don't think that in accepting that it's a simulation, I don't think we're supposed to go, I got to get out of the simulation to the actual reality. Some people are motivated that way. They kind of want to get out of the experience of the flesh to something somehow deeper, and they use maybe some kind of sophisticated meditation technique or psychoactive drugs to try and achieve some kind of transcendence. I think that is largely a fool's errand. See, I used to think in the beginning of this whole journey for me, I used to think that I had to reach the non-duality behind the duality. But the non-duality is this. This is already non-dual. You see, I mean, I don't know whether there are hidden levels of reality that are all sort of built on top of each other, and I don't know whether there's like a higher order of reality that peers into ours and sees things that we don't see. I have no evidence to suggest that there is that, and I think even the dabbling that I've done into things of a psychic or magical nature, I don't think they even really point to that view of reality. I think there's a higher order. I think that's necessary. I think physics has to be encased in some kind of metaphysics, because it's not explainable on its own terms. But I don't think that higher reality is a thing that you're supposed to reach with your limited mind, any more than a goldfish can have an experience of the transcendent. You know, human being isn't really any more significant than a goldfish, except in terms of greater complexity. But we're just two different strands of evolution. Goldfish has a limited perspective on reality, given the goldfish bowl. So does a human, given what we can see with our microscopes and telescopes and whatnot, and with the limited capacity of the brain to think about reality. There's no reason to think that reality, that the complexity of reality perfectly matches the complexity of the human brain's ability to cognize things. It could be way more complex, and probably is, than we could possibly wrap our minds around. And I think things like the number pi, which is transcendental in nature, I think they're pointers to that. And I think there was a lot of misinterpretation of what my video on the number pi was trying to communicate about reality from the atheist community, but that's old news. Anyway, I'm kind of going around in circles here. Yeah, what I'm kind of dancing around here is, don't fall for the trap that you're supposed to escape reality. You're supposed to escape the kind of simulation that you're in to get to the reality, like Neo in The Matrix. The Matrix is a great movie which provides a nice analogy for this sort of thing, but ultimately I don't think we're in the Matrix as such. I think a better mythical picture to put around it is the one suggested by Alan Watts, and I'm sure he wasn't the first person to suggest this. It's the view that, imagine that you're God. We're mythically talking about this, I'm not talking about the anthropomorphic being. But if you're God, what's the one thing that you can't experience? And that's you can't experience a surprise, because you know everything. So all this is God's way of surprising himself. I guess we're playing a little fast and loose here with our ideas, but I think something like that is what's going on. A more sophisticated way to say it would be this: if you're God, prior to the universe, existing in the blinding light of your own glory, right? So I'm not talking about dark, empty space. I'm talking about an all-seeing, all-knowing being who is everywhere, but there's nowhere to be but non-space, right? Is all-seeing, but there's nothing to see because nothing has ever been created, right? Is all-knowing, but there's nothing to know because there isn't a universe of stuff. So what does such a vacuous being do with himself? He plays the game of forgetting who he is, and here we are. So that's kind of what I think's going on. The idea is to play the game. You know that you are God, but you're playing the game of forgetting that you're God, and all the drama that ensues from that game. Yeah, I do think it's something like that, but it's mythical language we're talking about here. Because ultimately the question about what is going on, the question is too big for a mere human to get to the bottom of.